I'd just like to introduce a bit of our facilitator today. So it's Mr. Shabir Hussain Mustafa, who's currently the Senior Curator at National Gallery Singapore. He currently oversees the long-term exhibition Between Declarations and Dreams, which surveys art in Southeast Asia from the 19th century to present day. Yeah. With that, invite everyone now.
What I wanted to do was I have written down a lot of notes, and initially my idea was to somehow offer brief summaries of the two presentations, but I think we can just go straight in to the discussion. And I mean there are a series of strands that emerge, both in terms of Lav's film and also what two speakers have shared. There are a series of terms that emerge. There's the colonial as a kind of a backdrop, not a static backdrop in fact, but an active one. There's of course this looming question of the nation. And what does the nation actually mean? Who constitutes it? What are its lines? Is it a chronological play? Is it wayward? How does one even begin to consider it as practitioners working in the field? And then of course there is also this larger question and this term that came up in June's presentation, but it also came up in Silka's presentation. And Lav, you've talked about this as well in previous occasions, which is this question of the Malay, and this term, the Malay. One of the interesting things is there's this writer that I read quite often. The first time I'm actually publicly admitting to reading him is the Malaysian iconoclast Saleh bin Junaid. He's a figure who created a lot of trouble for a lot of people in the 70s, just simply by the way he behaved. Famously, he urinated on a very important exhibition. He just walked in, pulled down his pants, and then just urinated on the art. But there's, in one of his writings, he begins with the use of the word Malaya, and he says that, my friends in the Philippines, for them Malaya means to be free, freedom. And that's not a word that we're used to here. We're used to it as a political term, as a term that somehow the British gave us, and we have to now live with at times as well. I mean, it is British Malaya. It sort of was constructed in the 19th century. But yes, June, happy to hear alternatives. But it means free, to freedom. And I want to somehow begin with that. This phrase, and invite Lav to sort of say something about it, and then we can come to
Malaya. We pronounce it Malaya. It's a Tagalog word. The Tagalogs are the tribes, the Filipino Malay tribes, in the middle part of Luzon. This is the northern major island in the archipelago called Philippines. It's a word. It's a word. It's a Malay word, Malaya. It's freedom. It's that.
And I'm just going to try and divide our conversation into two parts, and this applies to all the speakers. On the one hand, we can look at formal complexities in composition, in thinking, in encounter, in viewing. But on the other hand, also to talk a little bit about context, and the context around which works emerge. Something that we've heard today from both the speakers, from June and from Silke, is also this larger question of the global left as something that is latent, something that is brewing, something that had somehow attempted to emerge, has disappeared almost, and now we are left with all these looming questions, which is partly an ideological struggle too. I mean, we saw it in Zunian's work, for instance. What is Zunian actually trying to uncover here? But within that story is also this question of heroes. And who exactly constitutes a hero today? Is the hero a conflicted individual? Is the hero imperfect? Is the hero driven by material realities that one finds? And I want to come back to the Lullaby and ask Lav, when you look for Bonifacio, did you find him in a material sense? I mean, when you went to the site, was there anything that you uncovered?
You mean when I went to the site where he was murdered? Yeah, part of my struggle to understand this part of our very complex history, this period in our history, this very complex part of our history, is to read everything about that period and to listen to a lot of oral histories also. And part of that also is to be corporeal about it, which is to go to the places where it happened. And one of the journeys to go to the town is called Maragondon. During the Spanish period, there's a rainforest around the town, and it's where they murdered Bonifacio. It's actually a very small area. There are 2 mountains, and then there's a small river that connects these 2 mountains. In the middle part of these mountains, that's where the crime happened. So it's a very, very small area, actually. So I went there with my assistant director. We stayed there for a week, just checking and feeling everything. And yeah, it's a connection that's, you know the distance of history already. It happened in 1897, and when I did that was 2 years ago. It's years, how many decades already it happened. And the first thing that I felt is that it's a very dangerous place. For one, there's a physical danger. There's a military outpost that they suspect us as communists that's visiting the place. They keep asking us, what are you doing here? I said, we're researching for what? About the death of Bonifacio. And Bonifacio is a revolutionary. So what are you? Are you NPAs, New People's Army, communists? You also work on the ignorance of the people who live there. I mean, ignorance or the military who are checking the place, they don't even know history. Their history, that part of our history. They know Bonifacio as a hero, as a mythical persona. They don't even know what happened. They don't even know, who he is. So you work around these things, and I felt the issue that comes to my mind is I have a responsibility to unearth the truth. And what is the truth? So I make this cinema. It's a connection. I mean, I created this cinema for that, to at least approximate the truth to what really happened. It's an approximation.
Absolutely, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about this notion of truth, which is also somehow connected to this question of time.
Right.
And how, for instance, as you move further and further away from that moment, the concept of truth itself evolves.
So again, the readings that I did, so you read everything. The work is 17 years. I started doing this in 1999. I wrote a script about it, and I keep revising and revising, and keep researching and researching oral histories and readings. So the issue of truth is the overriding thing, objective of the work. And yeah, so you see a lot of classing point of views. And so you have even the sightings. The writers are pro-Americans. There are American perspective on that part of our history, and then the progressive writings, which is very Malay, more of a Marxist, communist perspective, the struggle of the masses. So there are conflicting views. So me as a cultural worker, as an artist, so it's I need to contextualize my cinema, the one that I'm working on. So as a filmmaker, because it's a narrative, so I recreated the characters, like Bonifacio for one, the national hero. I don't know him. I only know him by the writings of these historians. So it's very hard, really, to go for that, the issue of truth, who he is. With the Americans, And some writers, he is an ignorant. Bonifacio is an ignorant. He's not an intelligent person. He's a poor person. But in my research, he's not an ignorant person. He's a very intelligent person. He read the French Revolution. He can speak Spanish. He can speak German. He can speak English. He's a very intelligent person. And a lot of historians wrote that he is a very ignorant person. He is like a commoner, a simple man. He is like a factory worker. He's not a factory worker at all. When I research, he's an artist, he's an actor, he's a writer. And you know these conflicting issues in history. And I'm not sure at all if I'm making the truth now. So it's the struggle of the artist also. When I make cinema, this film, the struggle is an approximation of the truth. I don't know also if I'm revising history. The issue of revisionism also comes to mind.
So when you say that the struggle has been 17 years long,
Yeah.
the script that you had...
There's so many iterations. I keep revising. Even during the shoot, I keep revising.
And I have one question before we go into June and Sukha. And I'm going to stay with 1896 in particular. I'll tell you why later. But there's a word that you've used in a previous interview, which I saw online, which is panahon.
Season, time.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because then we'll be going a little deeper into this question of time, and then that'll provide an entry point.
Again, panahon is a Tagalog word which means time or season.
And how does this operate in your films? I mean, for instance, in Lullaby.
Well, in Lullaby, panahon is that very particular period. So I contextualize everything. What happened during 1896 and 1897? So many things happened during that time. August of 1896, the revolution exploded. It started. And then 3 months later, Rizal was murdered, was executed by the Spanish. This is December 30. And then 4 months later, Bonifacio was murdered by a rival revolutionary. So it was very fast and bloody, and everything happened. And also, the cinematograph started. I mean, they were touring the first cinema all over Asia, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Manila. The French were touring it. They showed the cinematograph actually before the murder of Bonifacio. They showed it in Manila, the French.
Wow.
These things are happening.
And Rizal was
executed December 30, 1896. It's a very brief period. The revolution exploded August of 1896. Rizal was murdered December of 1896. Bonifacio was murdered May 11 of 1897. And then Aguinaldo sold the revolution to the Spanish December of 1897. It was very fast.
And the speed, I think, is something that one can also track at times, art historically speaking. For instance, June, in her presentation, shared with us a painting by Juan Luna titled Spain and the Philippines. And if you look at the date more closely, it's 1894. 1884. But talking about time, there's a similar painting in the Lopez Museum in Manila with the same title, Spain and the Philippines, painted 2 years later. And the amazing thing about that work is that you still see similar composition, but Spain is adorned, or at least the allegorical figure of Spain is adorned with more jewels, and the Filipino figure is almost wearing rags. And there's a pen which exists in the hand of the Filipino figure in the 1884 work, which is no longer present. The hand is empty. And so in some ways time operates and time can be tracked. And I wanted to somehow bring June into the conversation by asking you, so June, first you must comment on the term Malaya. Afterwards, I want to ask you, on the one hand, the map project involved looking at the region, but it also seems it involved looking at North America and New York in particular, and what was happening there. And as the project evolved, and when the exhibition was held at the Guggenheim, what sort of responses did you garner? Was it one of were they perplexed? Were the audiences perplexed? Or was it simply that, oh yes, we're all in a global world and we're all going to be happy and, hold hands and sing Kumbaya? So what was it? What was the kind of response?
Okay, we'll start with, no, I'm not going to talk about Malaya. But yes, I mean, that would be an interesting subject in itself to kind of go through the history of the word within the region. That said, Malay as a language definitely predates by centuries. So I think that might be another conversation. But in relation to the project and its relationship with the US, yes, that was deliberate. Coming into the project, knowing that how it was constituted, that it was a Guggenheim Museum, it was a project together with UBS, and therefore, which provided resources but also opportunity. For me, it was necessary that that context became part of the project, and I think with the museum, they were quite aware of it actually, and even happily encompassing these elements. So, within the organization of the project, a work like Roldan's F-16, which is very much a critique of the 25th President of the United States, right? I mean, that he, even if he believed in what he was saying, it was kind of a very parochial statement to make. They were quite open to that, in as much as there was another work that was part of the project by Cambodian artist Vandi Ratana called Bomb Ponds. And that work was a statement on US military bombing between 1964 and 1975, where 2,756,941 tons of bombs was dropped across Cambodia, and that was the work. And that was embraced by the project itself, and I think that made it interesting for me as well, that we could talk about the region and the relationship of the project at the same time. Yeah. So.
And in relation to this, I mean, I want to bring Silke in now. I mean, you talked a little bit about the project itself, and I think this is a question that can be posed to all three panelists, in fact. Is that when one presents work of, let's say, Southeast Asian subject matter or content outside of the region, and this is something I struggle with personally as well, is how does one, on the one hand,
evoke this question of history, that this place has history, that there are people here, something has happened, but at the same time, navigate through this larger question of the ethnographic, because at the start of your presentation you said that in presenting projects like this there is this entire heritage of world expositions and how people were taken to the colonial metropoles and presented as objects of curiosity. So how do you kind of navigate through this? I mean, I know it's a complex question, but I think I'd love to hear what Lav thinks about this too. Yeah.
Now, I think one of the things that helped is, first of all, I could fly into 15 Singaporean artists and filmmakers. So we had a quite strong Singaporean presence in Paris. So we listened to these people in Paris. It was not me speaking on behalf of another country. And then I learned a lot from the work I did with Palestinians or Middle Eastern artists whose past is so fragmented, so they have to accept, that history telling is not a linear timeline as we believe nowadays with Facebook, and you know that there's just this chronological happening of events. And myself in Germany, I grew up a little bit with this very linear conception of history as well, because there was the disaster, World War II, and then we had to understand in school why our people did this, and then all of a sudden there was the economic boom and the peace, and there was Europe. So that was an eternal progression I grew up with. So I think I learned from these other projects that the layering of a project, spatial and also really the interdisciplinary approach that we tried to put into place was maybe one of the secrets, how to really multiply, to have a conception of history that is subjective and assuming that this is necessary, and to have all these different voices, and that this might create another portrait of Singapore. So I think that was something at least we tried to.
Love, for you as a filmmaker, as somebody who presents his work at such platforms, how
Well, history is culture. So part of the objective, or what do you call it, the vision of my work is to reclaim the past, reenact what happened. Again, you reenact things. It's an alternative world already. It's cinema, but at least there's an approximation of what really happened. So my works have real narratives, so I create real characters. I try to recreate them, and then the periods, of course. Again, you contextualize that by putting things. What really happened then? It's a question of again answering all those things that we don't know. Like, I grew up in Mindanao, the southern part of the country, and it's a Muslim area. We don't know anything about Philippine history at all. They taught us this book written by Zaide, and it's very pro-American. And when I grew up, I realized that they are all lies. Things are abridged. Things are just thrown to us by lines. December 30, Rizal was executed, and you don't really know what happened. And you're in your research. There's this whole gamut of struggles and so many things that happened during that period. And you're talking of almost 400 years of colonization. How do you present that in a 2-hour film? It's really insane. How do you present that in an 8-hour film? It's hard. It's already, you're already time posting. There are so many periods. And even in that film alone, I had to incorporate the logics that's written by Jose Rizal, because I believe that his second novel, El Filibusterismo, is the most powerful political perspective that was written about the struggle until now. Nothing can match that. You read El Filibusterismo, it's a political module. It talks about nationhood, it talks about struggle, and these are real characters talking. And you can relate to that because they're real characters. So in cinema, you can recreate those things by creating real characters also. Real characters.
There's a chapter that I find fascinating in El Filibusterismo, which is titled The Quiapo Fair. And essentially you have Rizal's characters walking through the vicinity of Quiapo. And today, if you go to Quiapo, I think it is still crazy after all these years.
It's chaos.
It's chaos. Yeah? And of course, in the vicinity you have the Church of the Black Nazarene. And I was doing a project years ago with 2 other social realist artists, Renato Habulan and the younger Alfredo Isquilio. And they were studying this one man called Manglauro, who used to sit in Plaza Miranda outside. He would never go inside the church, but he would sit outside with his disciples, clad in robes and all sorts of things. And
it's like Christ.
And on his robe, the words Christun Hari would be inscribed.
Christ the King.
Yes. And so the first time I saw Manglauro was with the artist. And I inquired out of absolute ignorance, curiosity. I asked Renato Habula, and I said, Arthur, why is he behaving like Christ? And then Arthur looks at me in complete, like, he was flabbergasted. He said, no, he's not behaving like Christ. He thinks he is Christ. And yes, he believes he is Christ. And in some ways, after which we took a walk through Quiapo itself. And of course, in Quiapo, you find all sorts of things. You find antings and scapulars and Catholic symbolisms, everything. And I suddenly recalled the chapter from Rizal. And the amazing thing about that chapter is, and this is where it is a political module, where it ends with this question. It says, there is all a series of mirrors, you see. And as you look further, and you look further, and you look further, and you look further. And chronology itself may be a moot point. And he ends by this line, I'll never forget it. He says, it's all a question of optics. It's about how you look at things. And I somehow sense that in your works too, as I watch them over the years. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts, about it, in terms of the act of reading Rizal.
Yeah. I just try to, again, approximate all those things, even in reenactments. Yeah. For me as a filmmaker now, the role of cinema is that, I'm using the word reclamation. In cinema, you can reinvent the past. In cinema, you can, reclaim the past. Like in my film, from artists before, I reclaimed so many traditions that were banished in my province, in Maguindanao. They were banished by the Islamic laws. They're beautiful traditions. It represents us as a people in the part of the region, but then this Western imposition banished them, and we cannot reclaim them. So we cannot practice them, and I use cinema now to reclaim them. If you watch the film, it's very alive there. It's another world, but it's a former real world. So it's the same with the thoughts of Rizal in this film that you saw yesterday. I'm trying to reclaim his thoughts, thread with the real events of the period, and also the mythological characters that informed us during that period.
Interesting. And I now have a question for Silke, because in terms of reclaiming, one of the films that you showed us is Zhu Nian's The Nameless. In some ways, and June, please feel free to comment. You worked with Zhu Nian on numerous occasions. What do you think is actually happening in the film? It's mesmerizing as a work. What do you think is happening? You said you'd talk about it later, so.
Let's see that. Well, actually, I discovered the film very recently myself. It was suggested by the Asian Film Archive, but of course I immediately liked it, because what I really appreciate in Zhu Nian's work is this layering and, the acceptance also of doubt and of not knowing. Because I think the problem we often have when we speak about history is that we plug concepts and rigid ideas of what is right and wrong. And he constantly plays with this idea that we don't know, this guy has 50 different names, we know some facts, but then also I think what really spoke to me in this film again is that there's this intellectual approach, but then there's also really these emotions. If you carefully read the different chapters of this film, it speaks also about the soul, it speaks about the water, about, not the unconsciousness, and then there, I don't know also if you paid attention to this, but there's a shift in the narrator form, so it's all of a sudden it becomes the first person narrator as well. So this constant change of perspective, and again the use of images that were made by someone else to tell the story of this man, this fiction, this speculation of who this guy is. I think that is something I see in the film, or I understood.
Jude, what's the background? I'm not familiar with the work, but the last work that you showed us, My Asian Americana, essentially as we saw it, right?
It's not actually an artwork, but it's a project that is, an artist is a producer, Anita Yoali is the producer, and Well, for me, and it relates to her spoken word poetry projects. So for me, it was just an interesting video in that it gave another perspective of nation and home and country and belonging, particularly for a project which would assume that or make assumptions about the nature of this belonging, this sense of representation and all that. Because for me, the project No Country was a means to perhaps uncover some of these other histories which are not so familiar to us, because we have these assumptions and prescriptions of what each nation is. So for example, we had a work, a trilogy by Amar Kanwar that was part of the project. And one of the works in there actually looks at what is known as the Red Corridor in India. Again, another aspect of India, not just historically, but in the present, which is not so visible to most of us in the region. I mean, the only times you get to hear about it really is if you are reading newspapers while in India itself. You know, you're not going to hear about the Maoists in that area in our newspapers here, for example. So for me, I thought that was interesting that, you know, an artist like Amar Kanwar felt this was very important. He also saw shooting and doing research on the Aborigines there, you know, the Adivasis and all of that. And so that was important for a project like this. And in the same way, you know, this other perspective of Cambodians who felt more at home in America was the kind of the flip side to it, you know. So that, yeah, to kind of have that reflexive moment. But perhaps going to the subject of what then gets unpacked in the process of uncovering these things, whether they are left histories, whether they are national heroes that have not, who have nebulous histories, is, well, the question is what does the work then produce? And for me, it was interesting that such a question was actually embedded in a lullaby to the Sorrowful Mystery, where you actually ask, what is the point of art? Where, you know, Isagani sits that, questions even Jose Rizal's poems, you know, right? And the art, the act of writing poems, that, you know, what happened to the poems you said would save the country, you know, that sort of thing. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. That in as much as there is this broadening of understanding of these places and impressions and histories of it, it is also a very fluid moment in a way. Yeah. And that fluidity for me is kind of important across the works, across the project.
One thing that I really in the film is on the issue of displacement. It's very powerful perspective. Let's say exiled Cambodians.
I'm sorry.
The issue of displacement is very powerful.
Yes.
I think it's all about that, displacement. The colonization has that slash displacement. We displace these nations. You know. The concept of nation comes when the very conventional view is that the nation comes when the freedom comes after colonization. But before that, there's civilization already. So colonization also has displacement, and in your film you show
This, I want to get into something which has sort of been suggested, but I don't think we've fully discussed it, which is this question of the global left and what exactly has happened to it. And we sense these gestures. You just mentioned Amar Kanwar as well. I mean, he looks at sort of leftist movements as well, which are in many ways kind of indigenous in nature. So they emerge from a very particular context. And Love, for you, when I think about duration in your films, duration, and I know you don't like that question, but this is more of a kind of a reflection on duration, is that it also somehow alludes to me and reminds me of of Soviet cinema, where they would produce epics, which would sort of go on for 10 to 12 hours, and it was seen in parts with overlapping sequences. And I'm just wondering whether, I'm just trying to probe here to see your sources of inspiration and where exactly you sort of posture.
I'm very influenced, my cinema is very influenced by the Russian novels, Tolstoy's and Dostoevsky's. If you read Dostoevsky or especially Tolstoy, there are a lot of gaps, lots of spaces. If you're a thirst editor, you want to cut everything, but you know that those things are important. And the same with the works of Tarkovsky. There are gaps that you want to cut if you're an editor. But then my imposition of the long duration is also very influenced by the idea, what do you call it? The idea of 100% on on the long take and the one take as more meaningful. There's more meaning. There's more truth on it. And in my praxis, when I impose that on my actors, it's important to them that you don't cut them. It's important to them, and because of that, I have more respect for that kind of character.
So have you had instances where actors also improvise?
Yeah, there's a lot, but I'm very, very strict with the lines also. I give them parameters, and if you go beyond that, then we cut, we repeat it again.
And to talk a little bit about this word lullaby, I mean, a lullaby is something that is sung. Sung just before you are about to fall into a kind of state of sleep. And when I watched the film, there are a series, it's a kind of almost like a montage, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But within it, there are these oneric figures. They're almost dream-like figures. For instance, even in the clip that we saw earlier of the feast, the characters emerge and they're around, and they're almost oneric, almost dream-like. And so maybe, do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Characters?
Yes.
This film, again, we studied what form I want to talk about form first. When me and the cinematographer, we talk a lot about what are we going to impose in the work. So we started with, we wanted to do anamorphic, which is very modern. And we said that we realized that it will not represent what is the film representing. So at some point we decided that it's going to be poetry, the old form of cinema, and also we were very much influenced by German expressionism, where we just want to be free with anything. And also the old Filipino comics of chiaroscuro, where the lights will be coming from just anywhere. We want to be free with this film. We don't want to impose on anything. So it's poetry and German expressionism and the chiaroscuro. And a lot of smoke. So maybe that's the dreamy part of it. You see the characters and there's a lot of smoke. We always do the smoke thing. So it's kind of dreamy and it's a black and white, and it creates that kind of feel, that kind of mode.
I just want to invite our two panelists. Do you have any questions for Lav before we open it up to the floor?
I was very intrigued by the songs and the people sing. What is the inspiration behind that?
The song that's being sung always in the film is it's a condiman. Condiman is a Filipino love song. It's a genre in our musicology, so to speak. That song is not the revolutionary song. The revolutionaries composed a march song, a war song, but then the revolutionaries keep singing the song. It's called, what's this? Now I'm forgetting the title of the song. But it became very popular during the revolution. So it became the hymn of the revolution, actually. They were singing this during the lull in the battles. It's a love song, actually. It's a real song. There's a real character. There's a real composer. He never put his name but the lady is a real character.
Okay. I really enjoyed the film. And well, my question, and I'd watched Century of Birthing before, so for me that was actually quite different from this film. And my take of it was that in Century of Birthing and perhaps other films, there are a lot of micro-narratives in the film, and so you're kind of tracking these as you watch, to see how they kind of weave together. But in Lullaby, there is this overarching narrative because of the nationalist subject, right? And which I think is very interesting, because I was quite surprised actually that should come across so strong. I wasn't expecting that in the film. But then going back to something that was mentioned earlier about reception elsewhere, do you expect this film to be seen as a very nationalistic film in that sense? Or what's your position on that?
Yes and no.
itself?
Yes and no. I'm just trying to discourse on what happened.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to discourse on that thing called history. So I just want to discourse on it. I just want to be responsible.
Yeah.
Part of it is my responsibility to my people to, let's talk about this part of this period about history.
Because, I mean,
Just throwing it as a discourse.
In the film itself, you do talk about art making, as I mentioned just now, and there's also that section where I think Simone is asked, right, about what is the point of art. In Isagani is going, there is no point, I've given up my poetry, I don't care anymore.
Surface.
Yeah, and then Simone goes, no, it's important because of freedom. I thought that was quite interesting, and that created a certain tension within the film itself of what you were doing, which is very almost following this history or trying to follow this history in a very dogged fashion, and yet at the same time create space for the aesthetic production of this story, this myth itself, in a way.
Yeah, if you want to simplify the film, it's just that. It's a dialogue. It's a dialogue on that period. It's a dialogue with myself also. I'm also doubting my motives, doubting my perspective, I even doubt my praxis. I feel like I'm a fraud during the shooting, because I don't know if I'm actually approximating the truth. What's going to happen with the discourse? I will be accused also, of being a revisionist at some point. There's that danger also.
I think that's the possibility of history, no? And that it can be constantly engaged and discussed. I'm going to open it up to the floor. We have time for, I think, 2 questions. Maybe 3. Or 1. Yes.
Hi. Thank you for all your presentations. So there's an exhibition going on at the National University of Singapore. I think it's still ongoing, and it's sort of putting the Philippines and Vietnam in conversation through the works of Filipino filmmakers, and looking at so it's sort of Filipino filmmakers looking at Vietnam through the perspective of American presence during the war. I'm not sure if I explained that very clearly. So I just wanted to ask all 3 of you whether you think that colonial presence is the only way that film or visual arts in Southeast Asia can be brought into dialogue. I can try and clarify the question if you need me to.
Theoretically, no.
I mean, could you?
I mean, yeah, it's an easy point, I think, especially, and a fairly recent one with certain, with its history documented in such a way that such convergences within the region. It goes back to your question on the left, histories of the left. It's a point where you can do certain comparative study of aesthetic expressions and production through the region, so that makes it convenient in a way. But I don't imagine it's the only way in which we can talk about it. So, for example, in relation to, say, a longer history between Singapore and the Philippines, or actually this whole part of the region. with the Philippines, that could be another way in which to explore it. Yeah, but then it's all dependent on perhaps a certain historical document in a way. So that's also the limits of what one can postulate.
Tourism always inspires the dialogue.
I think sometimes it's also a problem of the flow, you know, how works are distributed, how you get access to them. I know, for example, again, when I worked with these artists in North Africa or the Middle East, these films went to Paris or London or wherever and then back to another Middle Eastern country, but it was very hard for a Tunisian to see a Moroccan film, for example. Or, you know, and they are neighbors or Algerians, but somehow this old colonial system was still very much alive in the distribution of the works. So slowly I feel that this can be deconstructed, and also, I mean, I think these post-colonial questions were very much a fashion as well for curators and programmers, unfortunately. So that also encouraged this whole flow of all these post-colonial discussions. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it became like a style for many. So.
You mean there's a certain appetite for a certain kind of material,
yes,
so to speak?
Yes.
Yes. Ah.
It's a question about making, and more. It might be more for Silke. The pieces that you use, that you brought up found footage, and just I'm wondering, was there or is there difficulty for artists to get their hands on it, and what do they have to pass through to utilize it, and do they have to make a kind of promises or possibilities of how they utilize it artistically? Yeah, I'm just wondering about that because again, you know, it does have a particular link to history, but yet at the same time, the way that they manipulate it or want to voice through it is theirs.
So you mean the context of production of these works,
or accumulation? I mean, even copyright or.
Ah, you mean for example for the found footage films?
Yeah.
Yes, this is very often a big problem. I think it's not a problem as long as you just produce for yourself and your friends, but as soon as a film gets publicly screened, the law is there that you have to clear the rights. So I remember, for example, for Pin Pin's film To Singapore with Love, she couldn't get some of the rights of the images that she wanted to, so she just kept a Google image of that image that she was interested in with a watermark or something like this, and because she couldn't afford to pay for these rights because it was extremely difficult to get them. So this is always an issue, but I think, I don't know what to say. I've been a video publisher for so long, so I was always very strict, and I feel that it's always better to clear the rights, of course, but sometimes if you just have to express something, there's always a chance that your film still gets maybe seen in more underground related networks. Or does that answer the question?
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. But I just thought they were really beautiful, and I thought the kind of collage in which they were presented. But I was just wondering of the obstacles that they may have to deal with to allow that to happen.
Yeah, for example, in Pin Pin's film, I mean, this was commissioned by the National Museum of Singapore for the History Gallery, so she had no problems in clearing these rights. But it's great that she had the freedom to do this montage and editing that is quite provocative, but it was still accepted, I think, without a problem.
I think we have time for one last question. Okay, I'd just like to thank our panelists. Thank Lav. Please join me in thanking. So we're going to be around if you have more questions. Yes, please feel free to approach them.